Our scripture for today is Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 36. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your might, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down to Jerusalem, to Jericho, and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him. And when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay whatever more you spend." May God bless our understanding of his word.
This morning, we have our very own Susan Elston, who is a member here, and she is going to be our storyteller for today, and we welcome you.
And I know my mouth will get dry. This is just water. So many of you have read my stories about kindergarten kids. But this story that I'm reading to you today is not about a kindergarten child, but it is about what a kindergarten boy once said to me. And I was talking in the room to a little boy named Tyler Allen, and he was telling me about his very special neighbor, whom he called his third door neighbor. And I just love that expression. I wrote it down and thought, I want to do something with third door neighbor. So I'd start to write and didn't care for what I did, put it away. This went on for a long time. And finally, after 23 years, I think I have the story that I was hoping to write. And before I read it, Courtney wanted to have a little bit of a discussion after my reading. And the topic would be, have you ever had a special neighbor? Someone who has been like a good Samaritan to you, or just one of those third door neighbors who always stays in your mind? So you might want to think about that. But this story is called Not So Very Far. "Duck," he hollered. "I did not duck this time, like I had so many times before. Now I had learned to listen. I looked up and saw them, ducks. A small flock was flying towards us. I turned towards my neighbor, Mr. Goodley. He nodded back as if to say, 'Yes, they will land here soon.' We watched as they circled the darkening gray sky. They were coming to settle for the night on his large pond. Their wings whistled as they flew over our heads, preparing to land. 'What kind are they?' I asked. 'They're not the ones I usually see here.' 'They're visitors who are migrating south,' he quietly spoke. 'Fall is in the air. It is getting colder. I can feel it in my bones.' 'My bones feel just fine,' I whispered while poking my arms and legs. 'Young bones,' he murmured and smiled. There were about 15 ducks in the small flock. Most landed gracefully on the pond and glided smoothly across the water. A few didn't and came crashing down and hit the water with a noisy splash. It seemed like the graceful ducks laughed at them. We giggled too. 'Beginners,' we mused. 'Must be their first time flying south.' 'Josh,' he said, 'go get them some cracked corn. They will be hungry.' I loved it when Mr. Goodley gave me jobs. His jobs were fun. I ran to his workshop, reached inside his large metal can filled with fresh cracked corn, and put a heaping scoop in a bucket. These ducks won't stay long, will they? I questioned as I spread corn near the edge of the pond. You're learning, he said while giving me a pat on my shoulder. They'll be gone in the morning. Mr. Goodley was my third-door neighbor. He was an old guy. That's what he told me. I figured that meant old like my grandpa. He scratched his head and explained that he was more like an old guy. I scratched my head and told him that was okay. I like friends of all ages, even those older than dirt. Those were his words. He was extra special. He taught me all about the creatures that lived on and around his pond. I learned the difference between frogs and toads, and that they don't give you warts. I was excited to tell my mom. I thought she would be happy with this news. She wears gloves when picking them up, but now at least she picks them up, unlike Danny's mom. He's my best friend. Mr. Goodley's workshop was near the pond. Often I would visit him after school, and sometimes Danny would join me. Inside the workshop was a list of jobs he needed to get done. We got busy with the ones we knew we could do. It made us feel good helping him. Some days we would rake leaves, clean debris from birdhouses to make them ready for spring families, or help him build new wood duck nesting boxes. Other days, Danny and I scrubbed and filled the bird baths with clean water, put fresh seed in his feeding tubes, and checked to see if his hummingbird feeders needed any attention. But sometimes we would just sit in his warm, cozy kitchen, sip cocoa with more marshmallows than we were allowed at home, and sit on the edge of our seats listening to his stories. Word about him spread throughout the neighborhood like feathers in a pillow fight. Kids wanted to be around Mr. Goodley. He did not care how you looked. It was more important how you felt. He tried to warm your insides with kind words. He always did. We loved him. Grown-ups enjoyed his company too. My mom invited him to join us on Sundays for dinner. She always cooked her pot roast. It was his favorite. Sunday was the best day of the week. We got to have Mr. Goodley all to ourselves. He told us about his wife, Lucy, who had passed away. My little sister asked, "How far away?" Oh, I silently groaned and started to get embarrassed. He gently took her hand and kindly answered while looking in her eyes, "As far as it is to heaven." "Oh, that is good," she cheerfully replied. "That's not so very far." He nodded and smiled. "You're right, Lily, not so very far." That was Mr. Goodley. He made an awkward time a comfortable time. He loved the snow. It was his favorite weather that came from the sky. Snow brought excitement. It made everyone a kid once again, including him. It was snowing the first time we met. I was slowly plowing through the deep snow in his backyard. I was wearing my new boots with Josh printed in bold red letters on their sides and watching how far down they sank. I almost bumped into him. He was making little covered shelters to put some seeds for birds. I stopped to help. He explained that the birds that fed on the ground had a tough time in snowy weather. With these shelters, the seeds did not get buried by the snow. Now, every bird had a chance for some food. I thought he was super smart to do this. I planned to make shelters when I got home. I soon discovered that he was also super funny. He told me his first name was Bob. He asked me if I knew what Bob spelled backwards was. I shut my eyes tightly, concentrated, and began to spell silently to myself. When I realized the joke, my eyes flew open and locked on his. His eyes were smiling, and so were mine. "Bob," we both shouted together, and landed so hard we fell to the ground. "As long as we're down here, Josh, let's make snow angels." We each made one. He asked me to help him up. We joined hands, and I pulled as hard as I could. I was surprised to discover how light he was. Let me just rest my hand on your shoulder while I catch my breath. Are you okay? I felt a little scared. "Oh, don't look so worried, Josh. Growing old is just part of living." I wrote our names under each angel. I spelled his backwards. As I plowed through the snow on my way back home, I heard Mr. Goodley holler, "I'm glad you're my third-door neighbor." I turned and waved. My insides got all warm and happy. I knew just what he meant. I continued to visit Mr. Goodley whenever I could. Some days I would help him in his home. His feet had slowed down. It took him a long time to walk. He was bent over like a slinky and often used his cane that my dad got for him. I began to take his garbage can out each week and bring it back to his house. I told him I did that job at my home, but it was much more fun at his. I enjoyed his gardens. He said if you stopped to look, you would find magnificent creatures moving through the dirt and under the leaves. You just had to wait and be patient. He let me use his big magnifying glass. Some days it took me a long time to haul the garbage. One winter afternoon, when I came in from playing outside, I heard my mom and dad talking in hushed voices. They did not usually do this. They saw me and asked me to come and sit with them. Mom said that Mr. Goodley had been taken to the hospital. He wasn't doing very well. My eyes filled with water. I nodded my head and mumbled, I know. I told my parents that Mr. Goodley had been quietly giving me hints about how he was feeling. He had told me not to worry and that growing old was just part of living. I thought I understood what he was trying to tell me. He wanted me to know that he would soon be migrating to a better place, just like the ducks, and that it would be okay. I started to cry. Mom and Dad did too. We hugged for a long time. Word spread quickly that Mr. Goodley had passed away. Kids of all ages came from around the neighborhood to gather in his yard. It started to snow, his favorite weather that came from the sky. We got busy filling the bird feeders, checking to make sure there was enough water in the bird baths, and building covered shelters for those ground-feeding birds. We talked about Mr. Goodley. We sang songs he had taught us. We told his silly jokes. "Duck," I hollered. I laughed as everyone ducked, but I looked up to see if there might be some in the winter sky. There were. My mom and others brought cocoa for everyone to drink. You could have as many marshmallows as you wanted. Kids and grown-ups started to make snowmen and added fruit and birdseed for decorations. I fell to the ground and started to make a snow angel. Others joined in. Soon there were families of snow angels. I made only 2 with hands touching. I wrote my name under one and spelled Bob backwards under the other. My sister was making a snowman with a younger neighbor, and I overheard her telling this young friend that Mr. Goodley had passed away. Her young friend asked, "How far away?" Lily took her hand and in her best grown-up voice kindly answered while looking in her eyes, "As far as it is to heaven." I smiled, felt a snowflake gently brush my cheek, and knew that my third-door neighbor was not so very far. Thank you.